What's the state of dog training in Canada and what training methods are used? That's a really important question. And even if you're not Canadian, you should be interested in the answer because it has big implications for dog welfare. Also, we don't have this data for other countries. And the other thing is, the idea of regulation is actually a big deal in lots of places at the moment, even though we don't have regulation. So it's interesting to know what Canadian trainers think. Now, last year, a survey of BC dog trainers' websites found that 72% of dog training companies in British Columbia use reward-based methods. Now, is that true if you ask them? What is it true across the country as a whole? Now we know because a new survey published in the journal Animals has the answers. So let's look at what reward-based training methods are and why they matter, the methods that Canadian trainers use and where they got their education, and also what their views are on regulation. So it has big implications for the future of dog training in Canada, and it's relevant to other places too. So first of all, what is reward-based training? Basically, it means giving rewards for the behaviors that you want to see more of and removing the rewards for behaviors that you don't want to see more of. And it's really important because we know that reward-based training methods are better for dogs' welfare. There is a whole host of research studies that show issues with aversive training methods, and they include things like a risk of increased fear, anxiety, aggression, and stress. And of course, long-term stress can be bad for health as well. And on top of that, they show a risk of a worse relationship with the dog's guardian. And because of all of this, organizations such as the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, the BC SPCA, the Canadian Association of Professional Dog Trainers, and others recommend that people use reward-based methods to train their dog. So is that the main method that's being used to teach dogs to do things in Canada? Actually, it's a bit hard to find out, but there are some answers in the study. If you want to know more about the importance of dog training methods, you can check out my book Bark because there's a section in there that talks all about dog training methods and why they're so important for your dog. So let's start with, first of all, where Canadian dog trainers get their education, because there's some really interesting results here, including, I think it's really interesting, 33% are describing themselves as being self-educated, as in they taught themselves, for example, from reading books or watching webinars or things like that. When it comes to educational courses, there's a wide array of courses available. And so, of course, dog trainers in Canada have taken a wide range of different courses. But when we look at some of the ones that have been most popular amongst Canadian dog trainers, we see that 11% of those who completed the survey are fear-free animal trainers, and 11% have taken Michael Shikashio's Aggression in Dogs course, and 10% have done Karen Pryor's. They've become a KPA-CTP. Looking a bit further down the numbers, there's 7% have become certified trick dog instructors from Do More With Your Dog. 6% have studied with the Animal Behavior College to become a dog trainer. The Academy for Dog Trainers, of which I am a very proud graduate, has just over 4% of the people in the survey have done that. The Karen Pryor Dog Trainer Professional course has been completed by just under 4%, and the Victoria Stilwell Academy has been completed by just under 2% of the people who've done this survey. Then, as well as educational programs, there are also organizations that offer credentials. So they don't have a training program, it's independent of a training program, but they have ways of assessing people, for example, exams, and people send in video and so on. The credentials from the Pet Professional Guild, it's actually the Pet Professional Accreditation Board, and the ones from the IAABC are reward-based. So that's kind of a map of all the different educational certifications and the credentials that people have done. And it's a really broad array. There were lots of other certifications that I haven't mentioned here. There are some that they only had a few people in the study had done. But it's really interesting. And that number of how many were self-taught, actually, that was a bit surprising to me that it's so many, because I think a lot of people do go and get certifications and credentials. And that's obviously a lot of people who are becoming dog trainers without actually going to do that kind of education. Now, so I'm especially interested in the methods that people said they were using. And I said early on that it's not as easy to tell as you might like. So in this survey, they gave people a list of words and they could pick the ones that they thought were most likely to describe their training. So this sounds like really good news. 89% said that they would use the words positive reinforcement to describe their training, which is awesome. 86% said that they use reward-based training, and 84% said they would pick the word humane. And as we go down the table, though, 81% picked relationship-based. Not entirely sure exactly what that means. So some of these terms have clear definitions. Positive reinforcement means that when the dog does a behavior and you give them something like a treat or a quick game with a toy as reinforcement, then they're more likely to do that behavior again in future. Reward-based actually has a kind of a technical definition, and I think some of the people who have said they're using reward-based mean they don't actually mean it by that way, because if you're using reward-based methods, often it means only reward-based methods. But when we come a bit further down, we see that there are quite a few trainers who describe themselves as balanced, a minority, but they're there. So anyway, science-based, 70% said that, force-free, 50% said that, and 48% said that the word obedience describes their training. And so balanced, 39% of people said they would use the word balanced to describe their training. 10% said pack leader and less than 2% said dominance. Now that's good because dominance is completely outdated as a training method. To be honest though, so is pack leader. So the fact that 10% of people say this describes their training, that's really quite unfortunate. And we do get some interesting results when we look in more detail about who is likely to support regulation. So I find this a bit hard to make sense of. So I think some of those trainers who are calling themselves balanced must also be ticking the positive reinforcement box as well, meaning that sometimes they use positive reinforcement, but sometimes they use aversive methods, which have these risks for dogs' welfare. So if we subtract the balanced ones from the total, maybe 61% use only reward-based training methods, and that's perhaps not too far away from the results from looking at the websites, but we don't really know. And that's a problem. We should know, because it would be ideal if absolutely everyone was saying they only use reward-based methods to train dogs, because that's what's best. So the most common concerns that the trainers were helping people with reactivity to people, poor manners like jumping up, and poor recall, as well as fear. Now that's not surprising at all. When they asked about regulation, then 2/3 of the trainers do support regulation. And it's really interesting to see that people are especially likely to support regulation if they think the words science-based and force-free describe their training. And they're less likely to support regulation if they have no certifications. In other words, if they're self-taught, and if the words balanced, obedience, or pack leader describe their training as well. So I think that's really interesting. That shows a distinction between different kinds of trainers. So only some kinds of trainers are more likely to support regulation. There was also a really interesting question about vet consults and how likely people were to refer people to a vet. Now, this is something that's really important. We know much more about how important this is these days because we have a better understanding of the fact that pain and other medical issues can affect behavior. So people were less likely to refer, trainers were less likely to refer someone to a vet if the words balanced, obedience, or pack leader described their training, or if they were against regulation. So that's an interesting finding as well. And the reason this matters, basically, dog training is not regulated. Anyone can call themselves a dog trainer in Canada. It's the same in some other places. And so if there was good quality regulation, it would make it easier for people to find a good dog trainer. But at the moment, it seems like there is still a bit too much of a divide. We need more trainers to move into using only reward-based methods. But this is a really interesting survey, and I contacted Dr. Camilla Cavalli of UBC, who is the first author of the study. And she told me in an email, and I quote, "There are so many types of training programs and certifications, which exemplifies the lack of standardization in the field. This creates confusion and can make it challenging for guardians to figure out who is a qualified trainer." And the other thing that she said to me, and I'm going to quote again, "Almost two-thirds of the respondents supported some form of regulation for the dog training field. This is quite encouraging as it could help bring clarity, but more research is needed to find the best way to incorporate diverse perspectives into this, which is important to achieve acceptance within the industry and ultimately better support dog welfare." So I would agree with her. I think it is good news that 66% or almost two-thirds of the participants in this survey do support the idea of regulation. And maybe at some point in the future, this is something that we will have. At the moment, obviously, it doesn't exist. It seems like we're not quite ready for it. If you are looking for a dog trainer, you need to read people's website, read reviews of them very carefully to make sure that they only use modern reward-based training methods. But this survey gives us a good baseline. This is the first time I've seen like a snapshot of dog training across the whole country. So I think that's really interesting. There were some differences between provinces that I haven't got into. The paper itself is open access. So if you want to dive into the results, I'll put the link in the comments. I'll also put the link to a blog post that I've written about it if you want to know more. And let me know what you think. Do you support the idea of regulation in dog training in Canada or wherever you are? Let me know in the comments.